So it's really important that sustainability not have just a separate sustainability strategy. It has to be a core part of the business, which includes their R&D, their product strategy, their marketing strategy. All of those have to be totally aligned.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this series of podcasts, I'm speaking with leaders in sustainability who are academic, nonprofit, government, corporate, the spectrum of professionals who are looking out the window at environmental, social, and economic challenges and saying, I'm going to make it my profession to do something about this. So with that, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Professor Jeana Wirtenberg, an associate professor of professional practice in the Management and Global Business Department at Rutgers Business School, where she's designed and she teaches a number of credits, including corporate social innovation, and she also spearheads a number of other activities, initiatives, and collaborations that Rutgers has at the school. With that, Jeana, welcome to the podcast. It's really great to have you join us. So as a starting point, a personal introduction to yourself and the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So my journey in sustainability started in about almost 25 years ago at the Academy of Management. And I was at a conference and I was listening to everybody talking, and I had this gigantic epiphany. And the epiphany was that for sustainability, the missing piece was the human side of sustainability. It was the people. With my background, I was an HR director at the time at PSEG, and I had been at AT&T in human resources for many years. I have a psychology background, PhD in psychology, and I decided that I would devote the rest of my life to applying my skills and background and experience as a change maker to sustainability, which would include around leadership, around employee engagement, around change management, around metrics, etc. And I decided I would leave my well-paying corporate job and I would form an institute, and I would form a foundation, a consulting firm. I would write books and I would teach. And that's what I've been doing for the last 25 years.
So you must believe that business has a role in solving these challenges. And I guess, what do you think that responsibility is? Because we've been talking about that, fighting over it for the last 20, 25 years. What's your view? What's the responsibility of business to be sustainable, to be responsible?
Well, unlike Milton Friedman, who said that the only role of business is to maximize profits for the shareholder, I truly believe, and my institute is dedicated to inculcating the belief everywhere that business and society can coexist, and that the role of business is not just to make profits. So I truly believe that the role of business is to both support the business and all its stakeholders, which includes its employees, its suppliers, the community, its customers, investors, as well as really society at large. So the role of business is to make money while doing good.
It's funny because you mentioned Friedman. I mean, this is one of the most common quotes that you'll hear at any business school. And I had a great conversation with Alex Edmonds over at London School of Economics. And I actually challenged him a little bit because I believe that Friedman actually was for sustainability and ESG, because that quote that you mentioned, that's like the first line of a paragraph, where in the middle it says within the rules of the road. Like, so the responsibility is to make money and profit for your shareholders within the rules of the road. And what I was thinking was, he set it up to say, if the rules change, you need to change.
Well, that's a very interesting concept because now we have very different rules in the United States. We have new rules from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have ESG, we have GRI. In Europe, they're changing obviously much faster than in the US, but we are catching up, and we have a long way to go. So I think by having, we called it the triple bottom line, now we talk about environment, social, and governance, is really becoming mainstream despite some significant pushback and misconceptions on the part of certain people.
What do you see in leadership these days? And those that are continuing, even when it's challenging, what have you found drives them as leaders or as brands or as organizations? Like, when you're looking at them, what is it that you've recognized or in your research you've seen that maybe help support, those brands who maintain consistency over time? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
So to respond to your question about the research has shown, this was some of the original seminal research that I did that was published in a journal on the world's most sustainable companies. And what we found was that the core qualities of sustainable enterprise have these elements: 7 qualities. And at the very foundation, to answer your question, they have deeply embedded values. Their values don't change. If you think about J&J's Credo, for example, their values have been around for more than 75 years. They're not changing them. The second, senior management support needs to be visible, constant. And so it's not wavering with this or that latest political statements. And third, strategic centrality, by which we mean that the sustainability is deeply embedded in their strategy. It's not some one-off thing. It's deeply embedded in their strategy.
Sorry, does that mean their sales strategy, product strategy, or is that like cost level? Like, which one drives the strategic focus?
So it's really important that sustainability not have just a separate sustainability strategy. It has to be a core part of the business, which includes their R&D, their product strategy, their marketing strategy. All of those have to be totally aligned. And then as you move up the pyramid here, what you see is traction. So companies that are successful and sustainable align all of their hard and soft systems, which includes their supplier systems, their IT systems, all their systems, their compensation systems, their succession planning, all around the sustainable aspects of the company, and measure it. So their measurement and reporting that we already talked about is very critical. And at the top level of the pyramid here, what you see is collaborative integration. And that means integrating people outside the organization as well as inside the organization. So talking to customers, talking to suppliers, talking to investors. And that is what we see as a sustainable enterprise. And on the next chart, what you see is how we build this sustainable enterprise. And so on the left side of this pyramid, you have the qualities of the highly successful sustainability strategies. And on the right, how do you manage for this? So these are some of the things you need to do, is to provide leadership development, because not every leader is going to understand these issues. So everybody needs to be involved. And then at the next level, what you see is we need to manage this as a transformational change process. We need to be intentional about it. It takes time. It could take 3-5 years to really inculcate the values, develop the competencies, do the upskilling that's necessary, engage the workers. And the most difficult part we found, and it continues to be a challenge, is the facilitation of collaboration and holistic integration inside and outside the organization.
What is it about facilitation, collaboration, integration that's challenging? Are there certain aspects? Is it being open to, say, internally it's easier because you can use KPIs and management structures to drive people, but externally they're worried about brand risk, they don't like collaborating with their peers? Like, what are some of the barriers that hold that back?
Some of the challenges are, first of all, how people's mindset is focused on competition rather than co-opetition, where you could work at an industry level. The other thing is you don't have control over the external people. But a great example of what I've done recently with Johnson & Johnson, they have something called their Onward Sustainability Program. We helped to train all of their top 1,000 suppliers. And they do make it a requirement for them to meet certain standards in order, and Walmart does the same thing, to meet certain standards. So there are ways that companies are finding to build some accountability into even their suppliers.
Now, if we talk about that, I mean, it sounds like you have a number of clients who are, say, in transition. Starting point, what pushed them to be more aggressive, more attentive, to invest more into a process where they're making that transformation?
So many leaders are doing it because it's the right thing to do. And then there are other leaders that need a gentle push from regulation. We have the SEC's new regulations coming down the pike, but a lot of what they need is the business case. So I think there's a lack of awareness that there is a very strong business case, and there's a lot of misinformation and misconceptions out there that being sustainable is going to necessarily cost more. So they have a very short-term view, looking at it next quarter. But if you look at it from more of a long term or incorporate the externalities, it's a very different picture.
How many of the companies understand the externalities that exist in their system? Is that a place where you're seeing more companies go to? Is that a good place for them to go to?
I think we have a tremendous challenge in that area because GDP does not include externalities. So that's a problem. We can talk from now till doomsday about the triple bottom line, et cetera. But as long as countries and companies are only measuring around GDP, we're actually supporting the wrong things.
In the short term, I totally agree. Like, I think that we're, and we are built around kind of quarterly, yearly performance for business. And you look at the externality, you can avoid it for a certain time. But if we go back to, say, agriculture, we know that climate change is going to affect weather patterns, which is going to affect water availability, which is going to affect crop yields. How many firms do you think look at that on a 10-year, 20-year cycle? And is there a business case for doing so against the fact that you have to report 3-month, 6-month, 1-year results? Like, how do companies balance that?
I think some companies actually in other countries do a better job, probably. Like Japan has a very long perspective. A few companies in our country in US think long term, but not enough. And a lot of it is also unpredictable. So we do have the World Economic Forum, and they look at the 10-year risks, the 2-year greatest risks, and the 10-year risks, and that's a place to start. And then I actually just presented that last week and showed the interconnections on their map between all of these 10-year problems and specific health impacts. So people who are working in the health industry or in agriculture need to understand how it's going to affect their businesses. A lot of people now are thinking about more nature-based goals, not just science-based goals, but looking specifically around nature. And there's a lot of brilliant people working on these, including many of my students. So a lot of work to be done.
Well, and that's kind of where I want to bring in your strategic, I get the strategic learning path, getting started, doing well, and then thriving. Like, what does it take for a company to go from getting started to actually thriving? Like, what are some of the key ingredients or the key things that when you see that happen, when you see that announcement, when you see that investment, you're like, hey, they're doing this for real?
Well, I love the question, but unfortunately you have to go through some stages to get there. I would say science-based goals, but you can't just jump there because there's such a lack of awareness. So I think we need to build the awareness, not just at the leadership level, but for all employees. And most employees, while they care about these issues, and that's been shown, they truly care about these issues, they don't understand how it affects their particular function. And so getting everybody in every function on board. Then you move into really much more topic specific trainings where people need to learn specifically about life cycle assessments, LCA, ESG, et cetera. And then when you get into the third phase, here's where we're looking at science-based transformation. And you're both dealing with mitigation as well as adaptation. You need to look at your supply chain, as I mentioned, J&J is doing. And we really need to, my final thing I'm working on right now is creating communities of practice. Because again, as I said, I think people need to work within the industry on different problems, like I mentioned packaging, for example, but you also need to work across industries because you're going to need take-back programs that are going to cross across all sorts of, for the circular economy. And we need to be a little more understanding of conversations that can cut across because we really need to work at an ecosystem level.
That sounds like a lot, Jeana. It's a lot to do.
That's why I'm so busy.
So as part of all this, what's the role of measuring success and planting visible or solid goalposts along the way? Like Ray Anderson had Mount Sustainability, zero virgin, zero waste, 30 years out. Is that the way to do it? Or is it next month I want to see, a year I want to see, 5 years we should be? What's the balance of goalposts and success along this?
So a long-term vision might be 30 years. A lot of people are looking at 2050. And then along the way, we know from psychology that people need to be motivated short-term and be reinforced. So basic operant conditioning, we need to have goals that people can see and do something about on a very short-term basis. So I would say a lot of these things are very challenging and take years, but at least every employee should have a goal in their annual performance objectives around sustainability, and it should be tied to what they're doing and what they're working on. And then with performance management, you'd want to have at least quarterly check-ins to see how things are going. You might need to change the goals. That's okay. And it should all be tied to the top company's goals. So everybody needs to see the line of sight from what they're doing to the company's overall goals. To close that, we really need to focus again on the people aspects of sustainability, to motivate them, reward them, to inspire them, to teach them, to include them, and to do it with respect and dignity for all people.
So we're going to segue a little bit. I'm going to jump off that because you mentioned teaching. Is it possible to teach sustainability? And what do you see as the role of academia? But teaching sustainability, you mentioned that. What's the role? Like, is it possible to teach sustainability? And what do you see as the role or the opportunity for academia to be involved in the teaching side of this?
Oh, tremendous role. Before I came to Rutgers, I was one of the people that was the original faculty at Bard's course, MBA in sustainability. I did the course on HR and employees. Definitely that they do a wonderful job of inspiring students, and their students have gone on to work at the CDC, all sorts of organizations. One of my former students was at Etsy as their sustainability. So that is one way of looking at it. At Rutgers, on the other hand, it's much more of a general, it's a state university, and I'm in the business school, and I teach a course, an MBA course called Intro to Corporate Social Innovation, where I bring in business leaders, and that's what students really love, who are actually doing this stuff, so that they really understand what it's really like in the business world to apply some of this stuff. But in addition, we're starting to integrate sustainability into multiple functions. So, for example, we created a new course on ESG and performance management in accounting to help make sure that the people who go through that course are actually become experts in ESG, and they can go get a job as the head of ESG in a company. And we also have exec ed is very important, because people who've been out in the world want to come back and take courses to be more current.
I started teaching in 2009 in the MBAs. 40% of the class hated me. 20% of the class got it. And the remaining 40%, it was kind of up to me to win them over. And I'm curious, how have you learned to teach sustainability over the years to be more engaging, to be more effectual, like in terms of like converting more people? And are there certain topics that you find you get a high level of interest? And is there certain topics that you're like, you just struggled always to gain traction? Or, I mean, it's important, we got to get through it, but you just never found that way to get through?
Fortunately or unfortunately, my class is an elective. So everybody that's in there, they want to be there. I want it to be a requirement. And then I have a lot of challenges, more like you say. But the people that are there really are interested in learning. They're interested in careers in this area. Simulations are very, very valuable, and cases. So I basically have a combination of the guest speakers from major companies that I'm probably going to spend most of August enrolling them already for the fall. And they are all passionate and very inspiring. And then I'm going to actually be looking at more simulations, because I think people really enjoy the simulations. Harvard has some great, I'll do a plug for them, some great sustainability simulations. I think in terms of topics, it really depends on their interest. So I try to, each week we have a different topic. So some people are going to be interested in some topics more than others.
Do you think this should be a core class? Like, do we need everyone to understand and be aligned to sustainability? Or is it okay to have 30 of 220 who are self-selective and are going to drive forward, and we, do as much as we can to empower them, skill them, so that we know that they will be the future leaders? Like, do we really need everyone on board? Or do we need the people who are going to drive this because they're passionate, they see the problem, they just want the tools?
Absolutely. So every time I read my feedback on my Intro to Corporate Social Innovation elective course, at least half the class says this should be a required course. Everybody needs to know this stuff. They say, I had no idea what I've learned in this course before. And most people have no idea. So you do need a level playing field where everybody hands-on, everybody knows a certain amount. We have a required course, for example, in ethics. This should be like that, at least a 1 or 2 credit course for everyone, all undergrads and all MBAs. In addition, we need more electives where people do want to dive into, what does this mean? How do you do this ESG stuff? And what does this mean in social impact and finance? There could be one in the finance department, an elective in the accounting department, elective in the marketing. So that's how I see it coming together. You have your basic for everyone required, and the rest are electives.
So we've been talking a little bit about more the younger students. What about, say, the executive, the exec ed group, or the certifications, or the companies that are coming to you for specific training? How is teaching them different? Are they looking for specific cases they want to apply to their business? Like, how do you teach them differently? Because they've got 20 years of experience. They'll fight you if you're not on the right path. Like, how do you approach them differently?
Well, we do what they ask for, that's for sure. So I have right now I'm doing 2 exec ed courses, one with Siemens on the circular economy. And they had very specific learning goals. We met many, many times. We tested everything. It was, really 90%, what they asked for is what we deliver. And the way we did it was really that we worked with their top team first and did this training on circular economy for the top team. And then that is now cascading into a required course for all of their employees in this particular business unit. Similarly, I'm doing another one with Atlas Copco, which is a manufacturing company. And what I'm doing there is they wanted to focus on people's personal imprint, footprint. So we're doing the ecological footprint for every single person that goes through the course in their entire company. They get their internal learning account credits. Then we switch to their organization function and say, okay, well, what can I do at my company? Which is an interesting way of doing it because you're starting from the personal to the company as opposed to the company to the personal. And it seems to be very effective because people feel more of a connection that way to themselves.
So as a bit of reflection, like if you think back the last 15, 20 years, what's the progress that you've seen? A lot of times, like right now, we're talking like, oh, D&I is going down, ESG is going down. So the mood is kind of grumpy. But what's gone well over the last 15, 20 years? Like what's some progress that we've made that we need to remind ourselves, be aware of, and use as a fuel source to keep going for the next 15 to 20?
So people are more aware of the problem. And I think the younger generation, certainly Gen Z and millennials, really want to do something about it because they want to have a world that they can grow up in. They're angry about it, and I don't blame them. Greta Thunberg and all said it. They didn't create this mess, but they're inheriting it. So I think the exposure of young people, the work of the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the commitment of various even academic organizations. One I didn't mention yet is the AACSB, which has changed their standards to now require focus on social impact. The Academy of Management now that I always go to is much more involved in social impact metrics. Although changing academia is about as hard as changing anything.
Yeah.
It's about at glacial speed, and I'm inspired by my students and the younger people. And again, I'm inspired by my 4 grandchildren and my son and daughter-in-law, and how we're bringing a better world into being.
So if someone's listening to this or watching this, what are a couple things they could do as an academic trying to move this a little bit further down the road? Like what are some tips, tools, tricks, hacks that you would give them so that they can get a little bit further, they can help their companies go a little bit further, they can drive their students a little bit further?
There's a lot of resources out there. So again, it starts with education, awareness, building your own awareness. Also, I would suggest you do your ecological footprint. Footprintnetwork.org. And then in terms of what academics can do to educate themselves and build their own awareness so that they would be equipped to actually talk knowledgeably and try to integrate it into whatever course they're teaching, because it does have a connection to every single course. And there's lots of speakers that would be happy to come out and speak to your class.
Sure.
Lots of experts, young people that could relate to the young people in the classes, and that would also be very good. Join organizations. There's a ton of organizations everywhere focused on these issues, more than I could possibly imagine mentioning, but there are local organizations, there are regional, there are global, many people. There are billions of people working on these issues, billions.